welcome to the stream. I am your host, Buddha, and tonight we have a book called A Time of Dread by John Gwynne. It's a fantasy book. Yeah, I just said that, I think. There are other books in the series, but I don't think there's too much coinciding with the other books, I'm pretty sure, so you can read from pretty much wherever. So, without further ado, I don't think there's much else to say, but, you know, where we're starting. So, let's start, shall we? Just make sure my levels are good. Where we're starting. So, let's start, shall we? Yeah. Okay. Extract from the Book of the Fallen. A tattered extract discovered upon the corpse of a Catachem demon, the year 131, the age of lore. They think we are broken. We are not. They think we are defeated. We are not. For over 2,000 years, my brothers, we have fought our noble war against Elian, the great tyrant and his servants, the Ben Elim. 2,000 years our battleground was the other world, that place of spirit, where all things are eternal. And then, little over a century ago, we saw the fulfillment of our long-crafted plan to break into this world of flesh, to become flesh, so that we may wage war upon Elian's creation, mankind, to conquer and rule or destroy as we see fit. But we were betrayed, my brothers, and lured into a trap of the Ben Elim's making. On that day we fought like warriors born, shaming the heroes about whom the people of this world tell tales. On that day of dread, of tribulation, we fought with sharp iron, tooth and claw. Blood was spilt in rivers, but alas, we were outnumbered by the Ben Elim and their allies, who were led by a maggot that men called a hero, Corbin the Bright Star. I say to that, for Corbin is long dead, and yet we are still here. One day, I will spit on his grave, dig up his corpse, and feast on his bones, for it was Corbin who dared raise a blade to our master, our great lord Azeroth, and it was Corbin's kin, Cywin, who cast the spell that entombed Azeroth within a prison of iron. We fought on, long after that day, 100 years of war. They always were too many, and our numbers dwindled. And now, the Ben Elim hunt us, as do the followers of long-dead and thrice-cursed Corbin. So, my brothers, I say to you that we must change the way that we wage this war, retreat to the shadows, dwell in the dark places, and gather your strength. Bide your time, for our triumph is coming. The day when we unite again, when we will set our Lord Azeroth free, when we take back what is rightfully ours. Only do this, answer the call when it is given. They think this is the final chapter of our long defeat. They were wrong. So written by Gula, High Captain of the Catachem, until the restoration of our King Azeroth the Great. Chapter 1. Leda. The year 132 of the Age of Lore, Reaper's Moon. "She'd be down there," Leda said, knuckles whitening on the grip of his bow. He was crouched upon a steep slope of a hill, looking down upon a scene of wonder, a war. Horses and their riders swirled upon the plain in constant motion, from this height seeming like two great flocks of birds looping ever closer, the distant rumble of hooves setting the ground trembling beneath Bleda's feet. As he stared in envy and fascination, the echo of hurled challenges and insults, the harbingers of violence, drifted up to him.
"No, you should not be down there,"
a voice said behind him. Old Alec, absently rubbing the stump where his right hand used to be. The skin around his eyes creased and cracked like old leather as he squinted at the battle about to begin on the plain below.
"Of course I should," Bleda muttered. "My mother is down there, leading our clan. My brother rides one side of her, my sister the other."
But not my father.
"Aye, but they are more than 10 summers old," Alec pointed out. "So?" Bleda snapped. "I can fight. I'm more skilled with a bow than you."
That's not hard these days, Alec snorted and cuffed Bleda across the head with his one hand. Bleda immediately felt shame at his remark, more painful than the slap. He knew that neither of them wanted to be sitting on this hill while their own kin fought and bled on the field below. Your tongue is sharper than your sword, his father used to say to him.
Look,
Alec said, pointing with his stump.
Alton.
On the plain below, a lone rider separated from their clan, instantly recognizable to Bleda as his older brother Alton. 17 summers is not so much older than me, yet he is old enough to fight, and I am not. Bleda scowled at the injustice of it, though none of this ire was directed at Alton. He loved his brother fiercely. Alton was galloping hard, hurling close to the enemy warband. As he did so, a rider emerged to meet him. Galloping just as fast, both warriors dipped in their saddles, arms extended as they drew their bows. Bleda felt a jolt of fierce pride, as well as a cold fist of fear clench around his heart. Aim true, Alton. I cannot lose you as well. The world seemed to slow, sound dimming as Bleda stared at the two champions. And then, Alton was wheeling away, the other rider swaying in his saddle, toppling sideways, falling to the ground, dragged along as his one foot snagged in a stirrup. Alec let out a grunt of admiration for Bleda, punched the air with his fist, whooping and yelling his pride. He felt Alec's disapproval at the burst of emotion. The warriors of his clan were supposed to wear the cold face like a shield. But that was Alton down there, and he had just felt a champion of their ancient rivals. A swell of cheering rose up to them, changing into battle cries as the two warbands came together with a concussive crash. Bleda gulped, a squirm of anxiety coiling in his belly. He had seen death before, held his da's cold, wax-smooth hand, heard the stories of warriors back from their raids, even helped stitch their wounds. This, the death screams of men and horses echoed up to them, within moments the plain becoming a choking, seething mass of bodies, the splash of blood, the harsh clang of steel.
"What's that?"
Alec said behind him, pointing to the skies.
"Your eyes are better than mine."
Vultures are claros, Bleda said, as he squinted into the searing blue and glimpsed the silhouettes of wings.
"Too big,"
Alec muttered. Bleda tore his eyes away from the battle and stared. More and more winged shapes were appearing in the sky, speeding towards the battlefield, growing in size with their approach, great white wings beating through the air. Then Bleda saw the glint of sunlight on steel.
"The Ben Elim,"
he whispered. Winged warriors, wrapped in gleaming mail, swooped down to the battle plain, skimming above men's heads, stabbing indiscriminately with spear and sword, lifting men into the air, rising up steeply and dropping them, screaming, limbs flailing.
"No!"
Bleda hissed, hand reaching for arrows in his belted quiver as he stood, about to launch into a scrambling run down the hillside. Alec grabbed his wrist.
"We must help!"
Bleda shouted.
"This is not the Beni Elim's fight. They should stay out of it." "They said they would come. Would not allow the clans to go to war," Alec said. "And whether it's a fight or not, They are here now. Look.
The west of the battle, the realm of Aracona stretched into the horizon, a never-ending sea of grass. The vast plains, holy shit. The vast plains, punctuated here and there by clusters of low-lying hills. Holy. Low-lying hills. Around the closest range, Bleda saw a wall of dust rising up. Knew such a cloud could only be stirred by the tramp of many feet. A great host was coming. The Ben Elim's holy army, giants upon their great bears and their wall of shields. Then Alec was dragging him back up the hill towards their tethered horses.
What are you doing? We must help my mother,
Bleda yelled, but Alec ignored him, hoisted him into the saddle, and then, mounting agilely for a man with one hand, grabbed Bleda's reins with a click of his tongue and a touch of his heels. Against his horse's side, they were cantering up the hill.
Please,
Bleda cried. As a prince of the Serac, it was a word that rarely touched his lips. Alec looked between Bleda and the battle.
I cannot let you go down there, the old warrior said. Your mother would have my other hand and my eyes as well.
He spurred his horse on, up the hill and away from the battle. Bleda looked back as they reached the crest, and his heart lurched in his chest. On the field below, all was chaos and blood, winged warriors diving and swooping, slaying any who came within reach. Then the battlefield was gone, and they were riding hard for their camp. Bleda stared at the horizon as they paced a track in the grass before their camp, still clutching his double-curved bow in his hand. His brother Alton had made it for him, taking moons for it to be finished. Bleda watching and learning with fascination.
It is too big for you,
Alton had said to him, tussling his black hair.
It is a man's bow. The draw's far too great for you. But how else will you become strong, eh?
That had been over a year ago, and now Bleda would loose his third arrow before first had struck its target. Tension was thick in the air as everyone waited. Behind him, a crowd amassed of the young, the old, and the infirm. All else who could sit on a horse and draw a bow had gone to fight. Gers and wagons stood empty and unattended, dogs barking, goats bleating.
There!
A voice said behind Bleda, and all looked to the skies. Winged shapes were appearing, and on the ground beneath them a dark smudge. Riders approaching.
Mother,
Bleda whispered, recognizing her face before all others. Erdine, queen of the Serac, rode into their war camp. Her helm was gone, head bowed, a long cut upon her shaved scalp. The thick warrior braid that had been neatly bound and coiled upon her shoulder, the sleeping serpent, was now torn and frayed, matted with blood. That morning, her shirt of scale armor had glistened in the sunlight, but now it was dulled and dented. What was left of her honor guard rode about her, silent and battered, and curled behind and around them was a sight that took Bleda's breath away. Huge bears, great shambling beasts of tooth and claw, and sitting upon them were giants, men and women wrapped in leather, steel, and fur, axes and warhammers slung across their backs, swirling tattoos of vine and thorn coiled up their arms. Erdine reined her horse in, and her warriors stuttered to a halt.
Where's Alton? Where's Hexa?
Bleda thought, his eyes searching the riders for his brother and sister, and then his feet were moving as he ran to his mother, Alec stumbling behind, trying and failing to catch him. Erdine saw him and shook her head, but it was too late, and in heartbeats, Bleda was at her side, staring up his mother, bears and giants towering over him.
Alton and Hexa?
Bleda called up to his mother, and he grabbed her boot. Erdine looked down at him with an expression Bleda had never seen before. Shame. She blinked, as if not recognizing Bleda for a moment. And then, Uridine's eyes snapped into focus. His mother said to him. Bleda didn't know what to do. His mind and heart were filled with the Suruk iron code, which told him to wear his courage like a cloak, to live free and fight to the last breath for his clan, to show no sign of weakness or fear, and to never, ever surrender. But his mother had spoken. She was also his queen, and she had told him to run. He turned, looked around wildly, saw the camp in chaos, giants and bears everywhere. Others were arriving, columns of normal-sized warriors on foot, clad in black leather with huge rectangular shields upon their arms, silver wings embossed upon them. They spread in tight-packed lines about the camp, surrounding everyone within it, and their shields came together with a resonating snap. Bleda glimpsed shadowed faces in silver helms, smaller figures appearing amongst them, children, he realized, offering water skins after such a hard march. As he stared, he saw the figure staring back at him, pale and fair-haired, a girl holding a water skin up to a warrior. Even as she stared straight at him, shadows flitted across the ground, and the sound of wings filled Bleda's ears as the Ben Elim swooped low. One flew lower than the rest, great wings beating as he hovered above Erdine and Bleda. A long moment, grass and dust swirling. Then he alighted gently upon the ground. He was tall, taller than any man Bleda had ever seen, his hair raven black, wearing a coat of bright mail and gripping a spear in his fist. Blood crusted the spear's blade.
Is this him?
The Ben Elim asked, eyes lingering on Bleda a moment and rising to Erdine. Erdine was silent for so long that Bleda thought she would not answer. You must be strong, Erdine said to Bleda. Fear trickled through Bleda, then, at something in his mother's voice, and in the way the winged warrior had looked at him. He tried to master his fear, to control the prickling in his eyes that threatened tears. No, I am Suruk. I am son of Erdine, lord of all she sees. The Ben Elim stooped down and grabbed Bleda by the collar of his tunic, hoisting him up into the air. Bleda instinctively snatched an arrow from his quiver, knocking it to his bow. With a flick of his wrist, the Ben Elim slapped it from Bleda's grip, sending his bow falling to the ground. Bleda glared at the Ben Elim, expecting his mother to intervene, to protect him as she always had done, but she just sat upon her horse, looking at her with her gray eyes.
Israfil, Lord Protector of the land of the faithful, and you are coming with me, the Ben Elim said. A surety that your mother will keep her peace once we are gone.
What? Where? Bleda said, the Ben Elim's words seeping through him slowly as if through water.
You are to be my ward, Bleda, and Drasil will be your new home,
the Ben Elim said. Ward? Drasil? The words set Bleda reeling as if they were blows. Drasil was the Ben Elim's fortress far to the west. I am to be their ward? Prisoner, he means. No, Bleda whispered. Mother? A long silence looked between Erdine and Israfil that spoke a pride and shame of the victor and the defeated. Fear returned then, a chill in Bleda's heart, seeping into his veins, carrying a tremor to his lips. The cold face. Do not shame, mother. Do not shame my people. It is agreed, Erdine said, her face a mask, only her eyes speaking her message. You must be strong.
It is the price that must be paid,
the Ben Elim intoned.
There will be peace in the land of faithful. There is only one enemy, only one foe who shall be fought, the Kadashim and their followers.
No, Bleda said, both denial and refusal. He felt hot tears bloom in his eyes. Snatched at them, knowing the shame they brought. Alton and Hexa will not allow you to do this, Bleda said, anger and fear twisting his voice. Then there was a rushing of air and a beating of wings as more Benelim sped from the sky, alighting around Israfil. The first was fair-haired, a long scar running from forehead to chin. He threw something at Israfil's feet. They dropped with a thud, rolled in the grass, and fell still. Two heads, eyes bulging, blood still dripping, Alton and Hexa. The world went silent. Bleda's vision was reduced to the severed heads of his brother and sister. He heard something distantly, realized that it was him, that he was screaming, twisting and bucking in Israfil's grip, hands reaching to gouge the Benelim's eyes, but Israfil held him at arm's length, until slowly Bleda's strength drained away, like wine from a pierced skin. Israfil regarded Bleda with dark, emotionless eyes, then finally shifted his gaze to the fair-haired Benelim who cast heads at Israfil's feet. Although Israfil asked no questions, did not even utter a single word, the blonde Benelim spoke as if answering a reprimand, his eyes dropping.
"They would not surrender,"
he said, his feet shuffling in the dirt.
"They slew Ramil."
His eyes came up, fierce and defiant, and met Israfil's.
"They slew a Benelim. Gave me no choice."
Israfil held his gaze for a long moment, and gave a curt nod. With a flick of his wrist, he threw Bleda into the air, a giant catching him and placing him into the saddle in front of him. Bleda found new strength, fighting and squirming, tears blurring his vision, but the giant held him tight. Israfil waved his hand, and the giant was tugging on his reins, shouting a command. And the huge mountain of fur and muscle beneath Bleda was turning, lumbering away from the Benelim and Bleda's mother, from his kin and people, away from everything he knew, away from Bleda's whole world, towards his new home, towards Drasil.
It's water. My throat's dry. Hold on, let me get a couple bites of this fucking food I got real quick. Oi, oi, oi.
Magnificent.
Magnificent!
Chapter 2. Drem. The year 137 of the Age of Lore. Winter's Moon. Drem grunted as he lifted another shovelful of earth and hurled it out of the pit he was digging. He rested a moment, drank from a water skin, looked up, cold blue sky through draped branches that were swaying in the breeze. Birdsong drifted down to him. The angle of the sun told him it was close to sunset. The pit was deep, now level with his head, but he kept digging, swapping his water skin for a pickaxe that swung with practiced rhythm. And swings with the pickaxe, loosen the ground, fill his shovel and throw it out of the pit, back to the pickaxe. His shoulders and back ached, sweat stinging his eyes, but he ignored the discomfort, blinked the sweat away, and continued to hack remorselessly at the iron-hard ground. Sounds seeped through the rhythm of his labor, and the noise of the river beyond the pit. Footsteps. He dropped his pickaxe, grabbing his spear and pointing it upwards. A shadow fell across him.
"That'll do,"
Holden, his dad, said, looking down to him through a mess of iron-gray hair. "Not deep enough," Drem grunted, putting his spear down and picking up the axe again.
"It's deep enough to hold any elk I've ever seen,"
Olin said. Drem had been digging pits since he was 10 summers old. How deep? He had asked his dad all those years ago, "Twice your height," his dad had said to him. Back then, his dad had been digging the pit with him, breaking up the soil, and Drem doing the shoveling. Now, though, 11 years later, and Drem did most of the digging himself, his dad setting other traps along their hunting runs with noose and rope. He had to remind himself that he didn't need to dig hunting picks twice his height anymore, not now that he'd grown into a man, and a tall one at that. It still made him uncomfortable to stop, though. He liked to do things the way he was told the first time, didn't like the change. An act of will, he slammed the pickaxe into the ground one last time, felt to connect with something solid that sent a shiver up his arm.
Sounds like you found the mountain's roots,
Olin said.
Come on, let's eat.
Drem yanked the pickaxe free, threw it up to his da, then his shovel. Last of all, he held his spear shaft out. Olin grabbed it and held tight as Drem pulled himself out of the pit, his dog grunting with the strain, even though he seemed to be made of muscle, lean and knotted as old roots. Drem turned and looked up at his handiwork.
You chose a good spot,
Olin said, looking at the well-worn path that the pit cut across. It led down out of the foothills they were standing in towards the fertile plain, the ground around the river there soft and marshy. Drem smiled at his father's praise. Together, they cast a lattice of willow rods over the pit, then thin covering of branches and leaves, finally some bark and lilies.
To an elk. That tastes nicer than hot porridge and honey on a winter's day,
they said together, the end of their ritual. And then they turned and made their way up a steep slope towards their camp, the river foaming white alongside them. The sun was a line of fire on the edge of the world by the time Drem was turning a spit over in a small fire pit. Fat from a quartered hair splitting and sizzling as it dripped into the flames.
Smells good.
Olin grunted as he finished tending to their pack horses and furs, then came and sat down, wrapping a deerskin around about Drem's shoulders and pulling one tight about his own. Drem felt cold now that he had stopped digging, the night's chill seeping into his bones. Rolls of skins surrounded them, hide and piled high. It had been a bountiful hunting season, and now they were almost home. Drem carved the meat with his favorite knife. The wide blade was wicked sharp and longer than was usual for a hunting knife. They call a blade like that a saex in this part of the Banished Lands, his dad told him when they had forged it together. Drem didn't care what it was called. He just knew that he loved it, that it felt a part of him, his permanent companion. The bone antler hilt was a perfect fit for Drem's fist. He shared the meal between them, and they sat eating in the companionable silence. They were partway into the foothills that led up to a range of snow-capped mountains at their back, but Drem was staring in the opposite direction, out over the landscape that rolled below them. A great lake dominated the view, its waters dark and shimmering in the setting sun. About it, a patchwork of tree and meadow that was tinged with red and gold as autumn slipped into winter. Between Drem and the lake, the lights of a large town flickered into life. Tiny as fireflies from this distance, a sturdy stockade wall ringed the town, dotted with torchlight. It was Kurgard, the most northerly town of the desolation, built by hard people to survive in a hard environment. Drem liked the look of it all, the colors merging, lights glowing soft and warm like candles. Other lights sputtered into existence beyond the stockade walls. Homesteads scattered across the land. Drem's eyes searched out their own home, a little to the north and nestled amongst the fringes of the woodland, though he knew there would be no fires lit, no torches or candles burning at a window. Home, if I can call it anywhere that, when I've spent most of my life traveling from one place to the next. This will be our 5th winter in the same place, though that's the longest I can remember staying anywhere since Mom. He was looking forward to returning home after a year and a half of hunting and trapping in the Bone Fells. He liked his life in the wild with his Da, loved it even. But his Da was right. Winter was almost upon them, and that was not the time to be sleeping on root and rock. As he stared at the speckled landscape, he saw a new cluster of lights appear, further north and east from his home, close to the northern bank of the lake. "But wasn't there when we left," he said to his Da, pointing.
No,
Olin frowned.
looks like Kurgard's crown grown. Looks like Kurgard's grown. Hope they know what a winter this far north is like. Land won't be green for this much longer.
His Da looked from the panorama before them, and then up and over his shoulder at the snow-capped mountains and the darkening sky, watching his breath miss before him.
Winter's following close behind us.
"Aye," Drem grunted, pulling his deerskin tighter. "Strange that this land is called the Desolation," he murmured, struggling with imagining the landscape before him as an uninhabited wasteland of rock and ash. His dog grunted, licking fat from his fingers.
And that lake was once a crater.
"Oh, and that lake was once a crater?"
Aye, it was,
Olin said.
the Starstone crater, where a rock fell from the sky. Started a lot of trouble, did that rock.
Drem knew all about that, had listened to the tale tellers speak of how the Starstone had crashed down to Earth, though he struggled to imagine such a thing happening. The tales of old, the tales told of 7 treasures that had been forged from the Starstone, and that the first war had been fought over those treasures, men and giants shedding a river of blood. It had taken a god to stop it. Elion, the Maker, had unleashed his legions of Benelim, raining a judgment of death and destruction upon the world and its inhabitants. Elion had only stopped when he realized that he had been tricked, lured into the plan of his great enemy Azeroth, demon lord of the fallen. Elion had walked away then, abandoning the world of flesh and banishing both his own Benelim as well as Azeroth and his Kadashim wards to the world of spirit, the other world, where they remained trapped for 2,000 years, as men and giants slowly rebuilt their shattered world. Until just over 100 years ago, the Kadashim found a sorcerer's way to break their bonds in the other world. They returned to the banished lands in an explosion of hatred and slaughter. The Benelim followed them, their eternal war spilling into the world of flesh. "Much has changed since the coming of the Benelim," Drem said.
Aye,
Olin grunted.
and not much of it good.
Drem's Da was not a supporter of the Benelim. It was rare that he would have even mentioned them, despite Drem's attempts to lure him into that conversation. "Turning the Desolation into this is good, though," Drem said, waving a hand at the vista before them.
This is good.
His Da agreed.
The Benelim didn't do this. They've done it,
he said, pointing to the settlement beside the lake.
and others like them, people like us. We're trappers and hunters. Aye, well, I mean people that have traveled north and settled here, irrigating, farming, planting, growing. The Desolation has become this because a generation of people like us made it a better place. Though, I suppose the Benelim are the reason behind that as well. Their protection in the south. What drove many here.
Drem thought about that for a while. Stars prickled into life in the crow black of night as darkness seeped into the world around them.
They'll come here though, won't they?
No, they'll come here though,
won't they?
Drum said into the night. The Benilim, sooner or later, as they have elsewhere. The Kadashim? He said that last word quickly, knowing his dad did not like to hear the word uttered. Kadashim, dread demons of Azeroth who had escaped their bonds in the other world and entered Drem's world to become creatures of flesh and blood. Monsters come to destroy all that lived in the banished lands. His Da hated them, hated the very sound of their name, because they killed my mam. Hold on a second. I need to take some more bites of this motherfucking pasta, dog. God, yeah. Hungry as fuck. You don't know how hard my stomach's growling right now. Fuck it, I'm gonna finish this real quick. I can't stop eating. Holy shit. Oh my god. Excellent. Now. All right. He didn't like to upset his Da. Could hear his breathing was sharper, his frame tense, just from those few words. But he could get him to talk of the. But if he could get him to talk of the Kadashim, maybe he would then be able to talk of Drem's mom too.
Aye,
Olin growled, spitting on the floor beside him.
Benilim will be here one day. But later rather than sooner, I hope. May they linger in Drussil for 100 years, and every day until then shall be better for their absence. I've searched many a year for a place where we can live free.
He drew in a breath, seemed about to say something more, but only silence followed. Drumbeat breathed deep, the scent of pine trees in winter heavy in the air. Have you seen Drussil? He asked, a new tactic. Olin gave him a sidelong look.
I have, as you well know.
Drum opened his mouth to ask another question.
Enough!
His Da snapped as he stood quickly.
A long day on the morrow, and I'm head for bed.
He stamped his feet, stood there hesitantly for a moment, looking down at Drum. Then he walked away and lay close to the fire. Drum heard the rustle of furs and popping of a cork as the skin of mead was unstoppered. Drum sat and stared into the darkness, listening to the sounds of night. Drum woke to a great crashing, staggering to his feet, furs falling away, wet with dawn's dew. He looked at his Da, who was on his feet, a short-handled axe in one hand, knife in the other. The stillness of dawn was shattered by a roaring that echoed through the foothills, startling the birds from its branches.
The pit,
Olin said, and then he was off and running. Drum stooped and swept up his spear, his long legs carrying him after his dad, who was already disappearing amongst the pine trees that cloaked the hillside. The path curved close to the river, which frothed and foamed with icy fresh water from the mountains. Drum closed in on his Da as the ground began to level. And then,
saw him skid to a halt 20 paces ahead. Drem caught up, breathing heavily, staring in disbelief at the sight that had caused Olin to stop. The elk pit was a mass of limbs and fur, a great antlered bull elk, the head and shoulders scrambling on the ground as if trying to heave itself out. It was lowing frantically, clouds of cold breath misting and billowing, a terror and agony in its cries. Because something else was in the pit with it, or part of it was, its bulk too great for the pit to contain. Behind the thrashing elk, Drem caught a glimpse of a white fur, of long claws and a wide gaping maw full of teeth. As they clamped down upon the bull's elk muscled neck. With the bull elk's muscled neck, a bear, a giant bear. What's it doing here, so far south of the Bonefells? Scythe-like claws opened the bloody tracks across the elk's chest. The bear gave a vicious shake of its head, and Drem heard the crack of bones breaking, the elk slumping, slipping slowly back into the pit. Even through the fog of shock, Drem realized he'd never seen a white bear before. Beside him, his father stood as frozen as he was, awestruck by the savage power before them. "What do we do?" Drem whispered. The bear's head reared up from the pit, jaws red with gore, white fur stained pink, and it looked straight at them. "Run like hell," his Da said, pushing Drem back up the path, and in a handful of heartbeats they were both sprinting, legs pumping. Behind them the sound of the bear extricating itself from the elk in the pit, the thunder of its gait as it lumbered after them, Drem feeling the ground shaking beneath his feet. They ran amongst the pine trees, where the ground was spongy with forest litter and pine needles. Drem's heart felt it was bursting through his chest. A great crashing behind them as the bear barreled into a tree, the sound of wood splintering, and sudden pain, Drem's foot plunging into a hole, his body flying through the air, crunching to the ground. He tried to rise, but a sharp pain shot up his ankle, into his leg, and he dropped to the ground. He rolled onto his back, saw the bear powering towards him, a mountain of fur and muscle blotting all else out, small eyes gleaming in his huge head. Fear coursed through Drem, bone-chilling, limb-numbing fear. He knew he should do something, move, run, hobble, anything, as death hurtled closer and closer. But he could do nothing, only stare wide-eyed as it came claim him. And then his Da was standing over him, axe and knife in his fists. "Runda!" Drem wheezed. Olin drew his arm back and hurled the axe with all his might. The axe spun through the air, slamming to the bear's shoulder with a meaty thunk. It gave a rumbling growl, surged on. Drem remembered his own hand axe at his belt, fumbled to draw it from its loop, as his dad grabbed Drem's spear and sent that too hurtling towards the creature. Before knowing if the weapon had struck true, Olin threw himself upon Drem, covering him with his body. The world turned dark. The sound of the bear like a thunderclap overhead, a roar of pain, the smell of his Da's sweat. Ground shaking as the bear closed on them. Then his Da dragging, pulling, and rolling to the side. The bear so close Drem could smell it and feel the air of its passing. He lashed out with a small axe and a paw bigger than his head as it thumped into the ground less than a handspan away. Tasted the copper tang of blood on his lips. Scythe-like claws raked the ground, spraying soil as the bear's momentum carried it on. "Up!" Olin grunted, pulling Drem to his feet. Pain lanced up from his ankle, and he almost fell. His Da grabbing his arm and hauling it over his shoulder. A score of paces away, the bear was skidding to a halt, turning, Drem's spear protruding from its chest. With a swipe of its paw, the bear ripped it free. Blood swelled, and the shaft splintered. The beast lumbered back towards them. Abruptly, Drem was hoisted like a sack of grain onto his dad's back and carried away from the path. Drem saw the bear lurch after them,
pounding through the trees, closer and closer. Fear enveloped Drem like a fog, snatching his breath away. But through it, one thought pierced the haze. His Da was going to die trying to save him. A wave of love for his Da drove back the consuming fear of imminent death. But a new fear rose up, that his Da was going to die. "Leave me, Da! Save yourself!" Drem breathed. A grunt from Olin was the only response. Then Drem glimpsed his Da was running towards the river, and Olin was leaping, the bear swiping at them with its claws, his Da crying out, an arc of blood in the air, and they slammed into the ice-cold water. Drem gasped in the white foam, then was pulled under, not knowing which way was up, his hands flailing, feet kicking, lungs burning. His head broke the water, and he sucked in a great lungful of air, fluttered as the current grabbed and spun him, slammed him into a rock. He pushed away, glimpsed his Da bobbing on the water ahead of him, speeding through icy spume, then disappearing as the river fell away. He swam after, the current catching him again, sending him speeding in the same direction. Behind him, he glimpsed the white bear leaning over the river's edge, roaring in its rage.
Man. I got like mucus in the back of my throat or some shit. Like, shit. I be gulping this water down and shit like it's crazy, you know? It's crazy, you know?
Chapter 3. Riv. Riv's spear slammed into the target with a satisfying thud, piercing the straw man's heart. She gave a fierce snarl as it swayed and fell backwards, her eyes flickering to the crowd that stood about the weapons field, watching her and a score of others at their warrior trials. Her eyes found her mother and Afra, her sister looking like a warrior born in her best war gear, white wings embossed upon the black leather cuirass that gleamed beneath the cold winter sun. Their eyes met, and Afra shone with pride, making Riv's chest swell.
"Shield wall!"
A voice boomed, echoing off the stone walls of Drasil, and Riv focused again, speeding toward the companions, flipping her shield from her back as she ran, hand reaching for the wooden short sword at her hip. She was one of the first in line, her comrades settling around her, raising shields, setting feet. Bald pushed into her left side, dark where she was fair, all muscle and sweat, half a head taller than Riv, and almost as wide as he was tall.
"Nearly there,"
Vald grunted.
"Won't be long, and we'll be off on the long night."
"If One Eye doesn't break our bones to kindling first," Riv replied, and grinned at the speed at which Vald's smile twisted into a frown. A horn blast rang out, and all along the line, wood and iron thudded together, great rectangular shields overlapping, Riv and her companions pressing tight together, as they had been drilled countless times. Riv peered over her iron rim to see Baller One Eye step out from the crowd, captain of the Benelim Legion of Giants, his battle fame almost larger than his own huge form. He stood a man and a half tall, his white hair bound in a thick warrior braid, mustache knotted with leather and tattoos of thorn, and vines swirling up his thick arms. Wrapped in leather and fur, he strode towards them, gripping a long-hafted warhammer in his massive fists. More grim-faced giants followed him, striding towards Riv's shield wall. A worm of fear threaded through her belly at the sight of old One Eye, and she fought the urge to laugh, a wild joy leaping up inside her. "I have dreamed of this for far so long. Since I was born, it feels. 16 summers of wishing I was a warrior, the white wings and
Now, it's so close. Taste it. Ready, she called out, her voice trembling with emotion of this moment, as she tucked her head down and pressed her shoulder firmly into her shield. Bald grunted and unintelligibly. Shields in the second row rose to cover the heads of those in the front row, and then Baller was there, the air whistling as he spun his warhammer and slammed it against them, wood cracking like a burst of thunder. Riv felt the power of it shudder through the shield wall, a tremor that rippled through the wood and iron, flesh and bone, but as far as she could tell, no one had fallen, and the wall held. A thud from a further away, one of Baller's companions joining into the fray, and another, much closer, an explosion that numbed her shield arm and rocked her backwards, feet digging grooves into the turf as she fought to stay upright. Riv blinked, sweat from her eyes, still feeling the vibration that the last blow in her bones. She saw that there was a crack running part way down the center of her shield. Come on, give the order, Riv thought, her right hand clamped around the hilt of her short sword, but she knew to draw it early would be to fail this warrior trial. She snarled a curse and gritted her teeth. More blows rained upon them. Grunts and gasps all about her companions tried to hold and weather the storm, digging deep, even having practiced this so many times before and knowing that it was not real combat. There was still an edge of fear snaking through them, something different about the way Baller and his giants were pounding at his shield wall. Savagery that Riv had never encountered before. Shield burst into so much kindling somewhere above to the right, followed by a sharp scream. A horn ran out, 2 short blasts, and within a heartbeat, Riv's wooden blade was drawn, and she was stabbing out through the small gaps above and below her shield. She felt resistance, heard a grunt and smiled. She tried to peer out past her shield to see if it was Baller she had struck, but she saw nothing but fur and byrony rings of a male shirt. Another companion of horn blasts rang out from the rear, a signal for the wall to prepare to march. Then, one more long note, and Riv took a staggering step forwards, pushing against the pressure upon her shield, Vald keeping pace beside her, the rest of the wall rippling forwards, gaps appearing between the shields as the pace varied, but closing up quick enough. The horn blew again, sound initiating a moment Riv liked. The horn blew again, the sound initiating a movement Riv liked to think of as the Death March. When the enemy was close to breaking, and the advance of the wall aimed to crush any spirit amongst those that chose to fight on. Riv continued to stab over and under her shield, sweat stinging her eyes, dripping from her chin. Vald holding his own beside her. A shouted command from the other side of Riv's shield muffled, and then the pounding against the shield wall stopped, followed by one or more horn blasts, long and lingering. The wall rippled to a halt. Riv lowered her shaking shield. Those about her were doing the same. All of them sweat-soaked and aching, bruised and battered by Baller's assault. One Eye and his companions were grinning at them, his eye socket puckered with mirth.
Well, we've weathered a storm of iron,
Baller called out loudly to ringing ears that spread amongst the onlookers around the field. Baller dipped his head to Riv and the others among her. Apart from just, Riv thought, looking at one of her training companions as he was carried stumbling from the field, one arm hanging limp and broken. There was just time for Riv to wipe the sweat from her brow, run her fingers through her short-cropped hair, and enjoy a sense of relief at finding herself still standing. And then there was the beating of wings. Several Benelim rose from behind the crowd and swooped down onto the field, landing gracefully between Baller and Riv. Israfil, the Lord Protector, was amongst them,
clothed in gleaming mail, hair raven black, eyes like coals. He strode straight towards her, a wooden practice sword in his hands. His companions spread about him to engage Riv's companions on the final trial. Israfil raised his sword, dipped his head, and then he was attacking her, his weapon arcing down from above. Riv lifted her shield, knocking Israfil's wooden blade to one side, then countered instinctively with a chop to his neck. He pivoted away, as a man not using the advantage of his wings, and set about striking at her with combinations of forms she had been taught, which she knew more intimately than a friend. In no time at all, she was sweating, wrists, elbows, and shoulders aching deep as her bones, the power in Israfil's blows shocking her, even as he maintained perfect balance and poise. He hits harder than Vald, and faster than anyone I've ever come across. Then, Israfil was stepping back, giving her space and a moment's respite. His white wings, held furled behind his back, were twitching as he marched back and forth before her, his bright eyes appraising her, head cocked to one side like a predatory bird. With a flick of his wrist, he indicated for her to drop her shield. Even before it hit the ground, he was coming at her again, his blade slicing from all directions as she retreated before him. Even her speed, which was well known for amongst those that used the weapons field, only just saved her from a dented skull and cracked ribs. And then, without a word of warning, his wings gave a great beat, and he was lifting into the air above her, behind her, Riv twisting desperately to fend off his blows, grunting as his sword grazed her shoulder. What better way to test if we were ready to hunt Kadashin? The Beni Lim are the closest thing to our enemy. Riv ducked a blow that would have taken her head and rolled away, jumping back to her feet and leaping at Israfil as he followed, which, judging by the brief twist of his lips, caught him by surprise. Riv's sword snaking through his defense and stabbing into his thigh. If it was cold steel, you'd be bleeding like a speared boar now, she thought, then grinned. You try too hard, Israfil said, as he swept in closer, his sword chopping at her head, deflected, sweeping into a slice for her throat. Knocked away, coming back to stab at her face, Riv swaying, stepping back, thrown off balance by his words, not his blade. I've tried all my life to be the best I can be, to be worthy to wear the white wings, to fight for the Beni Lim. Was that wrong?
You fight to prove yourself to others,
Israfil continued, low voice and fierce, meant only for her ears.
It drives you, and you think it makes you strong.
His words pounded her as hard as the flurry of his blows that followed. Riv staggered backwards, her parries and blocks wilder, her counters slashing only empty air.
But you are wrong.
Israfil ground on.
Your pride is your weakness.
She felt a squeeze of pain in her chest as his words, the world dimming around her, her vision focused solely upon Israfil.
It makes you brittle,
he said, lips sneering in disgust and disappointment. Riv reeled, spinning into one space to give herself a moment to recover. She was gasping, as if she had just been gut punched. Brittle? No, I'm strong. I've trained every day, all my life for this. Israfil's blade slipped through her guard, but her quick feet pivoted her away, its edge grazing the leather of her jerkin.
Is it because you have no father?
Israfil said as he swirled around her.
That you must feel you must try so hard to prove yourself.
What? Riv spoke for the first time, feeling her shock and hurt shift into something else, edged in red. No, she said in a snarl. My sister is a White Fang, as was my mom before him, or before her. I have enough to admire. More blows, driving air and words from her lungs. Israfil's wooden blade connecting with her shoulder, one blow flowing into another, cracking her ribs, a great pulse of his wings, and she was stumbling back, slipping to one knee, the pain in her side fueling the anger that was swelling in her gut, outrage at being so wronged by someone she had respected completely and utterly until only a handful of heartbeats ago. My father? He's long dead. She looked up at Israfil, who hovered above her, mouth twisted in some unreadable emotion.
You are weak,
he said to her. Riv leaped at Israfil, a red rage flowing through her. She grabbed his belt and hauled herself higher, saw his mouth was moving but could only dimly hear his shouted words because there was a roaring in her head like a storm shaking the trees of Drussil. And then her fist was slamming into Israfil's face, once, twice, blood gushing from his nose, and his wings were beating, lifting them higher. Part of her was appalled at what she was doing, but that part of her was small and powerless, an observer to events, nothing more, watching as she rained blows upon the Benelim. Even then, all she could hear were his words, "Weak, you are brittle." And then the red mist filled her head and vision till she saw and heard nothing except her own wordless howl. Riv blinked awake and sat up with a start. She felt a pressure upon her chest and saw a man's face staring down at her, eyes creased with worry. "Easy, Riv," her mam said. "Rest a while." "As if I ever took that advice," Riv snorted, pushing her mom's hand away. She sat up, saw that she was still in the weapons field, her mom kneeling beside her. The crowd gathered in a half circle around Vald and the others who had completed their warrior trial. They were standing in a line, faces glowing with exertion and pride as Israfil stood before them, commending them on their prowess. "You are weak." Riv put a hand to her head, squeezing her eyes shut, remembered frozen moments, leaping at Israfil, blood from his nose rising into the sky. "What happened?" she muttered, an ache in the back of her head between her shoulder blades pulsing up into her head. She twisted, rolled her shoulders. "You attacked Israfil," her mam said, a horrified whisper. The voices of her companions and friends rose up, reciting the first lines of the oath. "I am a defender of the faithful," they all began, voices ringing out. "I should be there, beside them," she thought. "They should be my swordkin now, except that they have passed their warrior trials. I have failed." "I am the sharp blade that will slay the fallen," echoed across the field. She looked back at her mam, who was regarding her with sad, disappointed eyes, the choked sound in her throat. Riv pushed past her mam and ran. She saw heads from amongst the gathered crowd turn to stare at her, her sister Afra, her pride-filled gaze of earlier a thing of history now. And then she crashed into someone, both of them trembling to the ground. With a grunt, she climbed to one knee, saw the other person spring agilely to his feet. The youth was staring at her, lean and sharp-faced, with deep almond-shaped eyes and dark, withered skin, almost the same color as the alderwood hilt of her sister's short sword. She knew him, or at least knew his name, Leda, the Syriac prince who was the ward of the Benelim. Riv remembered the day he had been taken, all those years ago, when she had been her sister's attendant, her shield carrier, weapon cleaner, water giver, and all other manner of tasks. She loved it, but not that one long ago moment. The scene flashed through her mind, seeing the boy's proud face, his curved bow falling from his hand, face stricken as his kin's head had been tossed to the dirt before him, tears streaking down his face as the giant Alcyon had carried him away. Letta looked at her now, standing over her, his face as emotionless as the Benelim eyes dark pools. Holy shit. Letta looked at her now, standing over her, his face as emotionless as the Benelim eyes dark pools. I just read that again, okay. I heard what he said to you, Letta whispered. He reached a hand out, not to help, but to wipe a tear from her face. He looked at it, glistening upon his fingertip. Something about him changed, but it was only in his eyes. His face was still carved stone. This is his victory, your defeat, he said, showing her her own tear. She stared back defiantly, letting him see her anger and shame, allowed another tear to roll down her cheek, her own form of defiance. You will come back stronger, he shrugged, then put a hand on her arm to help her rise, but she shook it off, leaped to her feet, and then she was speeding around a corner where buildings hid Bleda and the weapons field from view. Riv ran through the streets of Drasil. The huge giant-built towers of stone loomed all around her, and high above, even their rooftops, their leafless branches of Drasil's great trees soughed in the cold wind. Faces passed Riv in a blur. Some uttered or nodded greetings, but Riv ignored them all. Shame, a cold fist, clenching in her guts. Her need to be away from the weapons field driving her on. She slowed to a walk, looked around her, and saw that her feet had taken her to the courtyard before Drasil's great hall. It reared before her, a huge dome of stone built around the trunk of Drasil's great tree, which in itself was wider than any man-built tower that Riv had ever set her eyes upon. Broad steps led her up from the courtyard to a massive iron-banded gates of oak, flung open so that the entrance looked like a gaping shadow-filled mouth in a giant skull. Riv crossed the courtyard and padded up the steps, earning a stare from the guards who stood around the doorway, a dozen white fangs in their black cuirasses of boiled leather and bright silver helms. They knew her, though, and so Riv passed through the doorway without opposition. Once inside, she hesitated for a moment upon the threshold and looked into the chamber. It was one huge circular room, the dome's arc rising high and cavernous above her, sounds echoing and magnified. Even the breath in her throat sounded loud and harsh to her own ears. The floor dropped away from her in a curve of tiered stone steps that cascaded down to the ground a good 50 paces below her. Riv went down to the steps, firelight from a great iron braziers washing over her. She glimpsed the Benelim standing in an alcove high above, others gliding gracefully through the slanting beams of the winter daylight that filtered down from shuttered windows set into the dome's walls. She reached the last dozen steps and stopped, looking into the chamber. Below her, the ground level, crossing a wide expanse towards the room's center, where the trunk of Drasil's ancient tree rose, for it stood a row of muscle, flesh, and steel. A score of the Queen's Ethelyn's giants set about a daze. Shield breakers, they were called. Some of them, the very giants that had stood and fought against the Black Sun's shield wall more than 100 years ago. Out on the plains beyond Drasil's walls, Azroth and his host of dread Kadashim had filled the skies that day, while his champion, the Black Sun, had led a war band thousands strong upon the ground. And yet we won. The Benelim saved us, Riv thought, sinking down and onto one of the cold steps and staring over the heads of the giants below her, her gaze fixed onto the days behind them and what they guarded. 2 statues forged from black iron They seemed at first glance one Benelim, one Kadashim joined the battle. Their wings were spread, one feathered, one with wings more akin to a bat. Things of leather and skin, but they are not statues. She stared at the Benelim, his features strained with exertion. Michael, once captain of the Benelim, she could even see a bead of sweat running down his forehead, and in his grip, the Lord of the Kadashim, Azroth, Lord of the Fallen. His hair was long, bound with braids and wire, his face regal and handsome, exuding a fierce pride, a deeper malice. I'm supposed to stand against that malice, supposed to protect the faithful and slay the fallen. What's wrong with me? Why did I do that on the weapons field? And to the Lord Protector of all people? Why did he say those things to me? She felt her belly churn at the echo of his words. A pain deep inside, sharp as any knife. Hot tears came to her eyes as she sniffled, wiping them away again. Footsteps echoed behind her, familiar stride that Riv would know anywhere, confident and full of purpose. Her sister, Afra, dark-haired where she was fair, calm and controlled, where Riv was not. The footsteps stopped. "You might as well sit," Riv muttered, slapping the flagstone stairs. Afra sat quietly waiting. "I hate myself," Riv whispered into the silence. Afra took a deep breath. "It's a setback," she said. "Not the end of your chances to join the White Wings." "I punched the Lord Protector in the face," Riv pointed out. "I?" Afra nodded, running a hand through her dark hair, close cropped like all the White Wings, practical in uniform. "Granted, a big setback then." She looked at Riv, her hand twitching to reach out and wipe away the stray tear that rolled down Riv's cheek. Riv saw her fist clench and the effort it took to resist that urge. "Why?" Afra said, instead, not accusing or judging. "Because..." Riv's voice caught in her throat at the memory of Israfil's words. She took a deep breath, controlling the emotion that was stealing her voice. "He told me I was weak. Because I have no father." "I'm sorry," Riv said, and then the rest split out in a torrent of whispers, Afra listening in her calm way. When Riv was finished, Afra sat there nodding, eyes staring into nowhere, looking at her sister. Riv saw a few strands of gray in her hair, was surprised at that. Her sister always seems so strong and capable, fierce and wise, never changing. She's getting old. "He was testing you," Afra said. "What?" "Many of us are fatherless and motherless. We are born of warriors, Riv, and warriors die. That is the way of it. Ardar was of the White Wing. He fought and died in service of the Holy War. It was just a part of our life." She was silent a moment, her eyes distant. "What was our father like?" Riv asked. She had never known him. A White Fang was like her mom, slain on a campaign soon after Riv was born. Afra looked down at her, stroked Riv's hair. "A warrior," she shrugged. "A White Wing. He gave his all for the cause, died for it." "I know that," Riv said. "I've heard it 1,000 times, but what was he like?" "Ah, Riven ap Lauren," Afra said, using Riv's full name for once. "He was like you, wild, like the north wind." Riv liked that, though she thought that quality might not have helped her warrior trial today. "So, it's father's fault I punched the Lord Protector then."
I don't think that will be an acceptable excuse to Israfil, Afra smiled. Though I wouldn't worry, she added with a shake of her head. Israfil did not mean what he said. Then why did he say it? Riv growled. Think, Afra said, poking Riv in the temple. The warrior trial is not just about skill of arms, Riv. Think about it. It is a test to deem if we are fit to face the Kadashim in battle. For that you must need blade prowess, of course, but the Kadashim are strong, yes, fierce and deadly, that too, but they also have dread cunning and will exploit any weakness. Imagine you were in a shield wall, and all the right insults worm their way into your head and heart. What if the rage took you, then, and you leapt from the wall in a red murder haze? The wall would be scattered, and your swordkin would surely die. Riv thought about that for a while, and whatever way she looked at it, there was no getting away from the sense of it. That smacks of truth, she conceded. Oh. Okay. That smacks of truth, she conceded. But it doesn't mean it is the truth. This time it is. A similar thing happened to me on my warrior trial. Really? Riv asked, wanting it to be true. It was a far better option in her head than the Lord Protector secretly being a wicked, malice-filled bastard. The Lord Protector? No. It was Cole. The sword schooled me. That soul sword schooled me. That don't make no goddamn sense to me, but fuck it. Her eyes took on a faraway look. But he said some hard things to me. Things that were close enough to the truth. If you looked at it, what he was saying was a shift of light. You could almost think, maybe. Aye, Riv agreed, a hiss of breath. But they were not the truth, Afra said, shaking her head. Cole spoke to me afterwards, and said to me it was only a test. Will the Lord Protector tell me the same then? Well, I'm thinking no, Afra said. I controlled my anger unlike you, and still passed my trials. Remember, where you have failed, you will have to take them again, so the Lord Protector will not want you knowing. I shouldn't have told you. She looked sternly at Riv. Don't tell a soul, not even ma'am. I won't, Riv grunted, almost insulted as if she would ever betray her sister's trust. And then, there's the matter of punching the Lord Protector in the face, Afra continued. Oh, yeah. Riv hung her head and put her face in her hands. An apology must be the wisest step, Afra said. Riv's gut instinct was to snarl, never. Israfil's words were still a sharp knife in her soul, but if it had been a test, it does not make sense, and is something the Benelim would do, testing every aspect of a warrior, mental as well as physical. It was a great honor, the Lord Protector choosing you to fight, to test. He must see greatness in you, Afra said. As do I. Grunted Riv. Shame I didn't live up to it. I'll apologize then, Riv said grudgingly. Good, Afra said, taking Riv's arm and tugging her to her feet. Now let's go find Ma'am. She's searching for you all over Drasil. Riv stood, feeling some of her hurt and anger drain away. When do you think the next warrior trials will be held? She asked her sick sister. A few months, most likely. A few moons, most likely. As soon as there will be enough recruits reaching their name days to make a shield wall. Maybe still this year then, Riv thought, or Midwinter's Day. Before then, you're going to have to do something about that temper of yours, though. It seems to be getting worse, not better. And that's not the kind of quality the Benelim want in their white wings. Discipline. Control, Afra said, putting an arm around Riv's shoulder and steering her up the stairs towards the open entrance. Aye, Riv agreed, knowing that the truth was harder in the doing than the saying. I've never been the calmest, never as calm as Afra. But she's right. It is getting worse. Otherwise, one day it's likely going to get you in a whole lot of trouble. I think it already has. Why do you come here? Afra asked her. Don't know, Riv shrugged. Though she did know, pausing and looking back into the chamber, her eyes drawn to the figures of Michael and Azeroth upon the days. They had been frozen like that since the great battle over 100 years ago. The 7 treasures had all been present, forged from the Starstone, and it was by the treasure's power that the portal had been opened between the banished lands and the other world. Through that gateway, Kadashim had poured like a dark plague, death and destruction, their sole purpose. Fortunately, the Benelim had followed close behind them, saviors of humanity. Somehow, treasures had been destroyed, reduced to ashes and molten metal, and Azeroth and Michael had been caught up in their destruction, voted in the cooling war, frozen for all time. Whether they were dead or alive, no one knew. But the Benelim, in a humbling act of sacrifice, had elected to stay and guard mankind against even the possibility of Azeroth's return, and to hunt down and destroy the Kadashim that had survived the Battle of Drasil. That was why she had come to this hall, to remind herself why she had trained so hard each and every day of her remembered life, to remind herself what was at the heart of all the blood, sweat, and dark mornings, the muscle training, the exhaustion, the sacrifice and discipline, something that was bigger than her insignificant life, something that gave her meaning and purpose. The great fight, the holy war, and I must be a part of it. And with that one, I am done. We will end it here on chapter 4. We made a good chunk of it. It was an interesting little tale. For now, I'll leave this music on so that whoever decides to come by and chill will know that there's peace in these lands. But yeah, I'm your host, Buddha, your host. Have a good night.